Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike .shop. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. One of my longtime listeners, and I hope I get his name correct, Kalar Brady, spotted something from last week's show right at 44 minutes and 44 seconds. I was talking about Maria Orsic escaping to New Swabenland down in the Antarctic, and something flew up over my right shoulder. I think it was a bug, but it was so fast it's only visible for a second. I went back and I tried to freeze the video right as it appeared, but it's just a blur. It was there so quick and then it was gone. Also, at 51 minutes and 34 seconds, there is some kind of a sound that comes from my left. I look up, but I don't remember seeing or knowing what made the sound. I'm glad to see so many of my listeners are paying attention. I could be just about anything from spirits to mice in the attic. Trouble is, if I really go looking into it, and I find something otherworldly, I'll either have to go find somebody to take care of the problem or live with it the rest of the time I'm here in this house. Uh, some things you do not want to do. One is use a thermal camera in your bedroom in the middle of the night looking around to see if there's anything there besides you, because once you find something, then what are you going to do? Don't do EVPs and things like that in your own house unless you're convinced there's already something there, because once you know, you can't unknow. But thanks for the heads up. I appreciate it. I hope I said, like I said, I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Kalar, Kalar. And of course, I'm assuming it's a guy, just because that's the way my brain works. That's why I keep asking for my listeners to send a photograph in so I know who's listening, what they look like, because otherwise, I have no idea. Y'all know what I look like. There's just something about monsters that sends a chill up the spine. There are monsters lurking in the woods, encountered by folks that spend time out walking around. And there are monsters in the ocean that are encountered by people who live, work, or play in the water. There were some monsters living thousands of years ago that the boys in the white lab coats tell us are no longer with us. Usually they base this on the fossil record. The fossil record has more holes in it than a politician's promises. The process of becoming a fossil is hard and conditions have to be just right, or the bones and teeth simply dissolve. Fossils are formed in many different ways, but the most are formed when a living organism dies and it is quickly buried by sediment. Soft tissue often decomposes, leaving only the hard bones or the shell behind. After the organism has been buried, more sediment, volcanic ash, or lava can build up over the top of the buried organism, and eventually all the layers harden into rock. It is only when this process of erosion, when the rocks are worn back down and washed away, occurs that these once living organisms are revealed to us from within the stones. That's a lot of moving parts that all have to move at the right time for a fossil to be formed. And yet, the boys in the white lab coats seem to rely on the fossil record to prove or disprove everything and anything. The Megalodon was here 3.5 million years ago. Their name means big tooth. They grew to around 60 feet long and weighed hundreds of tons. Look at a school bus and then add about 20 feet to it. That's how big this giant shark got. Their primary source of food were whales. The scientists know this because, well, they just do. Now, actually, they've found evidence of this. The only parts of the megalodon found to show it lived is its teeth, because the rest of the shark was made out of cartilage. Scientists have found whale fossils with huge teeth marks on them, which gave them the idea of what was making a meal out of these giant ocean-going mammals. On a few occasions, they have found megalodon teeth stuck in a whalebone. From there, everything they know about megalodons is pretty much speculation. I guess you could call it evidence-based guessing. The evidence is a bunch of teeth found all over the world and bites found in other animals. Some scientists say the megalodon was a predator, while others say it was a scavenger. Once again, they're using their best guess, I believe. The idea of the megalodon going extinct is mostly wishful thinking. Scientists estimate there may be between 700,000 and 1 million species in the ocean, roughly 2/3 of which we don't know anything about yet. That's how big the oceans are and how little of it has been explored. There are theories as to why the megalodon died off. One says that as the environment entered a cooling period, sea levels began to fall and currents shifted, causing not only a cooling of the ocean itself, but also a shift in the food supply. Theoretically, the megalodon either couldn't adapt to the colder climate, the food issues, or maybe both. Dr. Pimiento, a scientist who studies this sort of thing, said that she found no evidence for a relationship between megalodon distribution and climate. Therefore, there's no support for such a hypothesis. Instead, she found that megalodon trends in distribution coincided with the diversification events in marine mammals and in other sharks, further supporting the biotic set of hypotheses. It seems likely that the growth and huge size of modern baleen whales, the largest animal on the planet, could well have been driven by predation pressures from megalodon. Some folks say that sharks can't adapt to changes in weather. The Greenland shark is supposed to live near the Arctic Circle in water that is just above freezing. They're only found in very cold water. August 2013, researchers from Florida State University caught a Greenland shark in the Gulf of Mexico at a depth of 5,738 feet, where the water temperature was 39.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Not freezing. 4 previous records of Greenland shark were reported from Cuba and northern Gulf of Mexico. The experts also used to call the Greenland shark the sleeper shark, saying that they were not aggressive towards humans. Turns out they were wrong about that as well. It would make all of us a lot smarter if the experts would come out and admit once in a while that they don't know everything. Jeremy Wade jumped into the water with a Greenland shark. Later he found out that he just got lucky. Scientists say that the rise of other predators led to the megalodon dying off due to competition for food. The biggest, baddest fish in the sea allowed others not so big fish to take away its food source. I would think the megalodon would have just gone after the other predators as well. One reason I tend to not listen to the experts on whether or not the megalodon died out is there have been so many witnesses saying that they saw what looked like a giant shark that resembled the Meg. Now, the Discovery Channel's mockumentary from 2013 about the megalodon still being alive did have a short disclaimer right at the beginning saying it was fiction. A very, very short disclaimer. Most folks don't read all that stuff scooting across the screen at the begin or the end of a TV show or a movie. Shark Week went from a cool show to watch to a bunch of garbage. I have yet to watch the show. Now it's all celebrities going swimming with the sharks. If the celebrities were being fed to the sharks, now that would be interesting. But it's no longer science. Now it's just entertainment. Kind of like what happened to CSI, the TV show. The first season, it was all just science. I knew a lot of young kids who had decided they wanted to get into forensics because they were watching CSI. And then all of a sudden, Hollywood happened. And it was all about who's having a relationship with who, and who is suicidal, and who is crazy, and who's a drug addict. And where'd the science go? In the toilet. The found footage on the TV show on the Discovery Channel supposedly washed ashore after a fishing boat is attacked by a megalodon. It was kind of interesting. Yes, I did watch that episode. It looked just enough real to catch you. Then things went downhill fast. This did get me to wondering, was this nonsense put out there to make people think there was no way a megalodon could still be alive? It wouldn't be the first time that TV executives did things to steer attention away from some subject considered wrong for us little people to know about. Kind of like how the Air Force will slip some UFO investigator a whole bunch of information about flying saucers and then come out and say, oh, that guy's crazy because he's delusional or something. Yes, it's happened many times. 1835, Swiss naturalist Louis Agassiz described a triangular, finely serrated tooth which had been found worldwide since antiquity as belonging to a megatooth relative to the great white. Early records in published scientific literature speak of a 40-foot giant caught at Port Fairy, Victoria, in 1860. The jaws of this fish were sent to the collections of the British Museum of Natural History in London. The calculated size of the fish was published in a book, Catalogue of Fish of the Museum by Albert Gunther, a keeper of zoology at the museum in 1870. 1875, during an expedition for the Royal Society of London, the HMS Challenger dredged up a 4-inch long tooth from the depth of 14,000 feet near Tahiti. This was not a fossil, but an actual tooth. A great white can produce and lose over 20,000 teeth in their lifetime. Their teeth might get up to 1.5 inches long. Fossil teeth have been found 3.5 inches long from great white sharks. The teeth found by the Challenger were 4 inches long. Makes you wonder who or what dropped them. Combine this with the fact it was a tooth and not a fossil. I tried to find out how long a shark's tooth would last sitting on the bottom of the ocean, but apparently nobody knows. You'd have to know when exactly the tooth was dropped, and then you'd have to be able to study it for however many years it takes it for it to go away. In 1918, a group of lobstermen fishing out of Port Stephenson, Australia, saw the largest shark ever recorded. Described as being a ghostly white color and measuring from 115 to 300 feet long, this giant fish sent the fishermen packing. Australian naturalist David Steed investigated and he recorded their stories. He said, in the year 1918, I recorded the sensation that had been caused among the outside crayfish men at Port Stephenson, when for several days they refused to go to sea to their regular fishing grounds in the vicinity of the Broughton Island. Now, I had to look this up. At the time, lobstermen were also called crayfish men. The men had been at work on the fishing grounds, which lie in deep water, when an immense shark of almost unbelievable proportions put in an appearance, lifting pot after pot containing many crayfish and taking, as the men said, pots, mooring lines, and all. These crayfish pots, it should be mentioned, were about 3 foot 6 inches in diameter and frequently contained from 2 to 3 dozen good-sized crayfish each, weighing several pounds. The men were all unanimous that this shark was something the likes of which they had never dreamed of. In company with the local fisheries inspector, I questioned many of the men very closely, and they all agreed as to this gigantic stature of the beast. But the length they gave were, on a whole, absurd. I mentioned them, however, as an indication of the state of mind which these unusual giant had thrown them into. And bear in mind that these men, who were used to sea in all sorts of weather and all sorts of sharks as well. One of the crew said the shark was 300 feet long at least. Others said it was as long as the wharf on which we stood, which was about 115 feet. They affirmed that the water boiled over a large space when the fish swam past. They were all familiar with whales, which they had often seen passing at sea, but this was a shark. They had seen its terrible head, which was at least as long as the roof on the wharf shed at Nelson Bay. Impossible, of course, but these were prosaic and rather stolid men, not given to fish stories, nor even to thinking about their catches. Talking, not thinking. Further, they knew that the person they were talking to, being myself, had heard all the fish stories before. One of the things that impressed me was that they all agreed as to the ghostly whitish color of this vast fish. The local fisheries inspector of the time, Mr. Peyton, agreed with me that it must have been something really gigantic to put these experienced men into such a state of fear and panic. Eyewitness accounts from men who worked in the ocean day after day, I could see one or two trying to come up with an excuse to not work for a day or two. But keep in mind, they all wanted to stay out of the water. No fishing meant no money. No money meant no food. Would all these fishermen be willing to damage their incomes as well as their reputations based on a whim? Would they come out and lie about something like this just as an excuse to stay on shore? And we're not talking one or two men. We're talking a whole boatload of them. Several boatloads. During World War II, a Nazi U-boat crew said that they saw a giant shark off the coast of Cape Town, South Africa. 2 U-boats had met up to transfer cargo. As they sat on the surface, side by side, a shark swam by on the surface. From dorsal fin to tail, was guesstimated to be about 64 feet. The shark would have been closer to 90 or 100 feet. Now, the naysayers began saying that the photo was fake. I would listen to these folks a bit more if they weren't all being funded by the same organization. Snoops and the fact checkers and all these other companies, apparently they're all being paid for by the same group of people. In 1968, large shark bites were observed on a whale carcass, but measurements were not recorded for some unknown reason. Off Albany during the last decade of whaling in Western Australia, in the mid 1970s, Colin Ostell was employed by the Department of Fisheries, and his job was to measure the whale carcasses that were being taken in by the whalers. He told how he routinely measured shark bite marks on whale carcasses just to know how big they were. Colin recorded all of this in his notebook. Over a 7-year period, he also investigated around 60 great whites, so he was familiar with their behavior. The largest jaw bite marks he ever recorded measured 19 by 24 inches, as a part of 5 bites, all made by the same very large shark, which attacked a floating sperm whale carcass that had broken free from its chains as it was being towed into the harbor. When compared to a 16-foot shark with a known bite radius of 11 by 13 inches, the scaling up of those bite marks would suggest the shark was at least 36 feet long and was alive in the seas of Albany. Now that is a big shark. The experts say that the biggest great white ever seen was anywhere from 20 feet long, and they named it Deep Blue. May 14th, 2022, a giant shark was caught on camera scouring the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest part in the ocean. This sighting had sparked a debate about whether or not the Megalodon could still exist. There isn't a lot of food way down there, 36,201 feet. There are a few large fish found below 26,000 feet. The giant fish seen on the camera might have been down there for other reasons than food. Maybe it was down there looking for a mate, or maybe it was just down there having a look. We don't know what sharks think. Let me get this cat out of here. Before she... and she did something. I don't know how they always manage to mess things up, but she just turned off my notes. I couldn't do that in one fell swoop if I tried. Anyway, back to the giant shark at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Maybe there was something down there that drew this shark's attention. A team of researchers hunting for the wreck of a lost World War II destroyer in the Philippine Sea returned with evidence of the deepest swimming squid ever recorded. And now here's another cat. The big fin squid was spotted more than 20,000 feet under, thousands of feet deeper than the previous record holder. The researchers also recorded 4 Cariat octopi, better known as Dumbo octopi, because their fins kind of resemble elephant's ears at around that same depth. When did the plural of octopi become octopuses? To begin with, that sounds wrong, especially if you grew up knowing that they were octopi, was the plural of octopus. When I was growing up, the plural was always octopi, kind of like geese and goose. Like how some people say fishes and monies. There's no such thing. It's fish and money. They're both singular and plural at the same time. One bad use of English I've heard a lot when people think the singular of premises is premise. It drives me nuts. And it's on TV a lot, especially commercials. It's like, learn to speak English, dang it. Like I don't. I know I have trouble with English also, but what I do know, it drives me nuts. You'd think it'd be too cold way down there at the bottom of the ocean. The bottom of the Mariana Trench should be like ice cold. The bottom of the trench is about 34 to 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that was a cat jumping off the edge of the other desk. There are around 126 different species of shark. Almost all are cold blooded, but 5 shark species have warm blooded or endothermic capabilities. Being cold blooded means that their body temperature changes with the environment. No one knows if the Megalodon was cold blooded or warm blooded. Scientists can say they were cold blooded. They can also say that the giant fish spoke French. Once again, this is based on assumptions. Okay, what is the attraction to my desk computer today? I don't know what's going on. They've been acting this way all week. If you watch The Bag Company Back to School Part 6, you'll see a lot of cat activity when I was trying to record the show. The huge predator at the bottom of the Mariana Trench was seen swimming over what looked like an abandoned shark cage. I wonder about the diver that had been in it. A giant prehistoric shark ate anything in its path, and it was said to lurk in the Earth's deepest oceans. When a whale dies, its body will float due to a buildup of gas as the inside decomposes. After a few days, the whale will sink to the bottom of the ocean. Underwater currents can push these massive bodies into the lowest parts of the ocean, such as the Mariana Trench. In order for there to be a sighting of any monster, things have to happen. One, somebody has to be there when the creature comes from hiding and into view of the witness. Two, the witness has to survive. If the monster kills him, well, there's not going to be a report made. Three, the witness has to be willing to talk about their sighting, even with all the nasty comments and snide remarks those who came before them had to endure. And four, somebody has to record the sighting somewhere where it can be found at a later date. All that has to happen in order for there to be a record of a sighting. As some huge ocean liner crosses over one of the many oceans, any kind of a shark with a half the sense of self-preservation would stay well clear of it. Also, most of these huge ships are being run by computer. There aren't men standing watch by the bow or up in the crow's nest. There's no one around to be the witness should a giant shark come to the surface. Should the shark decide to come in close to check out some small boat, would the boat survive the encounter? Now, boats disappear all the time, and the authorities will quickly write this off as either being piracy or natural disasters. Someone I listen to a lot once said, every PhD knows where the library is. Most of these people do their research by reading what others have written. If those they are reading are typical PhDs, they spent their time in the library as well. The oldest known coelacanth fossils are about 410 million years old. A coelacanth became extinct in the late Cretaceous around 66 million years ago. The boys in the white lab coats determined this based on the fossil record. No fossils meant no fish. Kaputski, the experts have spoken. 1938, a live coelacanth was netted in the Indian Ocean near the southern coast of Africa. Rewards were offered for more specimen. In 1952, a second was obtained near Comoros Island. Numerous others have been caught in that area. It was later discovered that these fish were well known to the islanders, who considered the fish to be quite edible after it had been dried and salted. Their rough scales were also used as an abrasive, kind of like sandpaper. Of course, no self respecting white lab coat wearer is going to listen to these locals who obviously don't know when something doesn't exist until proven wrong. Then they act as if they knew about this creature all the time. Dr. Carl Schuker, a leading cryptozoologist, has dedicated his life to researching animals thought to be extinct. He has said that unusually large and unidentified sharks are still being reported a lot. An image from 2016 appeared to show a 60-foot shark in the Japanese Suruga Bay. The sighting of a 23-foot shark off of South Australia coast excited the world's media, with some making references to the great white that was featured in that classic movie, Jaws. The movie Jaws was loosely based on an actual historic event. The culprit was probably a bull shark, since some of the killings took place in freshwater rivers. Around 400 years ago, Megalodon teeth were thought to be petrified tongues. In 1667, the Danish anatomist Nicholas Steno figured out from his dissection of a great white shark head that they were the teeth of an ancient large shark. Scaling up teeth and jaw size with known living sharks yields an approximate maximum size for the megalodon to be about 60 feet. But in weight, it would have been at least 10 times the mass of a large great white shark. So just because it's longer, well, that also means that it's going to be a lot bigger around. A large megalodon tooth measures just over 7 inches, suggesting a maximum body size of 60 feet. Some sharks lay eggs while others give birth live. The megalodon could carry several babies until giving birth. Experts think that the babies would eat each other until only one shark was alive at the time of birth. When being delivered, they would come out at about 6 feet. Once again, they're basing all of this on SWAG, SWAG, the scientific wild guess. You can use SWAG to figure out what the A stands for. They believe the Meg raised its young in a nursery area of eastern Pacific. Now, this assumption is based on thousands of small Meg teeth found in certain shallow water areas. The folks who get paid to look for things in the ocean have been looking for anything unknown, but not too weird. Scientists have been looking for new species for hundreds of years, and once in a while they find one. The megamouth shark is another sea creature that can grow to enormous size, at least 20 feet and possibly even longer. But it was not discovered until 1976, when one was accidentally killed. This beast eluded researchers for so long because it lived in deep water and it only came up to the surface at night. The giant oarfish was discovered in 1996. Seeing as they can get up to 25 feet long and they're bright silver, how could they go so long without being discovered? They only come to the surface at night as well. Not knowing if the megalodon was a nighttime hunter and maybe going way deep during the daylight hours, it could remain unseen forever. Great white sharks like to hunt by hanging out in deep water, and then they shoot straight up to attack their prey. If the megalodon hunts the same way as the great white, it just might avoid being seen until it hits its target. The violent activity that will follow would make identifying the attacker nearly impossible. Any witness would be convinced that they were seeing a killer whale in action. A whale washed ashore near Cape Town with a huge bite taken out of it. The wound was so big, whatever killed the whale would have to have been 50 or 60 feet long. The whitecoats came out saying this was the work of a killer whale, even though the bite marks showed sharp teeth marks, whereas killer whale have blunt teeth. When the bites were proven to have sharp teeth, the scientists said the whale was killed by several great white sharks working together, like a pack of wolves. Back when I was young, we visited the Field Museum in Chicago. On the wall was a fiberglass representation of what a giant squid looked like. It was over 20 feet long, and I think, because that was 50 years ago and can't really remember, and I can't find any photographs of it today. When I got back to school, I told the class about giant monsters living in the ocean, and the teacher told me I was mistaken. There are no monsters in the White House. Oops, that's the wrong show. There are no monsters living in the ocean. I was torn between believing what I had seen with my own eyes and what I was being told was the truth. Today I know better. Who are you going to believe? Me or your lying eyes? Why did teachers do things like that? Oh, I know, because they didn't believe me. Back then, there was limited resources if you were looking for answers to questions most folks didn't want asked. The library was just about the only place you could ask these questions inside your head and maybe get some answers. This was about the time I began looking for strange things. There were books covering the Loch Ness Monster, and of course they always used that one photo. There were copies of Patty from the Bluff Creek, the Patterson-Gimlin film. What always got to me was people would see these images with no explanation. They would usually come out with, oh yes, but those things don't exist. Now we all know that the Loch Ness Monster photograph was faked, but they can't prove that Patty was faked. And yet people will look at that movie and they'll go, wow, but that can't be real. It can't be real because they simply don't believe that it can be real. I read a lot of stories of ancient mariners having encounters with giant monsters that had tentacles and could pull a ship under the waves with little to no effort. Ouch. There were stories of men being plucked from the rigging by something. Even stories of octopus that could come up on land in order to catch their prey. It's amazing what you could find in the library. Whalers would tell about finding huge sucker marks on whale that they had caught. People sometimes think squid have suction cups with their tentacles. And not really. It's not like that thing you stick on a window. Squid suckers are lined with little teeth that sink into the flesh and they will leave a scar. The scars found on whales were said to be over a foot across. A squid will have several suckers across each tentacle. During World War II, a cargo ship en route to the British Isles, bringing much-needed supplies, was hit by a torpedo and sunk. The crew scrambled over the side and then sought the relative safety of one of the life rafts that had been thrown over as the ship went down. 8 men managed to climb aboard the craft and watch as the rest of the convoy sailed away. No one was willing to come to their rescue, seeing as German U-boats were still in the area. It had been suggested that the last ship in a convoy should stop and pick up any survivors, but this would make them a sitting target, so it wasn't done. The night was long and cold there in the North Atlantic, and the men settled in to wait for rescue. Not much else they could do. With nothing to occupy their time, the men fell into an unrestful sleep, more to pass time than renew the body. At some time during the night, the men were awoken by a blood-curdling scream. A quick check told the lieutenant in charge there were now only 7 men on the raft. Did one roll over and fall into the sea? In the dark of the night, they strained to spot the missing man, calling out to him, but he was nowhere to be found. When daylight arrived, the men got busy waiting some more. The raft was 12 feet by 12 feet and only stocked with minimal survival rations. Nobody brought a book or a radio. There they sat, waiting for a ship to come by. Nightfall Nightfall found them in less than exuberant spirits. They settled in for another long, cold night. Once more, a scream brought everybody from their slumber, followed by a loud splash. The poor man had just time to reach a hand in the direction of his mates before being pulled into the inky depths. Something had him. In the dark, with no idea as to what had snatched 2 of their fellow sailors from the raft, the men decided that somebody would have to stand, well, at least sit watch, to keep everyone else safe as possible. Armed with a knife, each man would take a turn guarding the others as they slept. This time the sound of screaming brought them awake, but the guard was there, waking them to the unknown danger. A huge tentacle was reaching up from the depths and then feeling about the raft for a morsel, said morsel being one of these men. Everyone tried to crawl to one side, away from this thrusting appendage as it waved about seeking its next meal. It latched onto the lieutenant's leg and wrapped around it. The lieutenant grabbed hold of his companions as others stabbed at the monster with their knives, which looked about like toys against this thing. With great effort, they managed to hold the officer and send the creature away with dozens of small wounds all along its length. The lieutenant's leg was bleeding, and he had hundreds of small lacerations, which, when examined in the light of day, radiated out in a circle 6 inches across. When at long last the men were picked up by a passing destroyer, nobody believed the story of this nocturnal giant squid that had taken their friends away. They said it was just too much time at sea, or maybe the bad effects of having their ship sunk. Even the wounds on the lieutenant's leg were written off as being caused by debris as the ship was sinking. After a short time, the men simply stopped talking about it. When other sailors heard about how the witnesses had been ridiculed, anyone seeing any kind of a giant sea creature would not want to join them, so they would keep their stories to themselves. Things wash ashore all the time. On occasion, dead sea monsters have been found. Huge unknown creatures that the scientists couldn't explain. Any time these reports were told to the authorities or newspapers, the usual reaction was to ridicule the witness some more. He was drunk, or he was crazy, or he didn't know what he was looking at. A giant squid laying on the beach in full sight of anyone willing to have a look. Instead, the folks in charge would send somebody out to make it go away. Scientists would rack their brains trying to come up with a thing that this giant squid could be other than a giant squid. They would come out with things like it's actually a whale's intestines that washed ashore. Others would collect the dead creature and take it to some back room of a museum and store it away, well out of the sight of the rest of the world. Over time, the folks in charge began to die off, and the ones with questions of their own began to look into the possibilities of giant sea monsters. Fishermen were questioned instead of ridiculed as to what they were seeing. Cameras got cheaper and easier to use, and on occasion somebody would snap a photo of a giant squid. Though the total number of recorded giant squid specimens now run into the hundreds, the species remained notoriously elusive and little is known, and has retained its status as being a quasi-mythical animal. Now they know it exists, but they're still saying it's a mythical beast. Some folks in white lab coats come out saying that the giant squid found on beaches all over the world were simply mutated a normal squid. Yes, it's huge, but you'll probably never see another one like it. Why would so many scientists ignore something with so much evidence? It's the old guard. The men and women who wrote books declaring no such thing could exist. They would lose a bit of their status as being world experts if you're getting millions of dollars to teach a class about science and somebody comes along saying that you got things wrong. Your cushy job could be in peril. No one is going to buy your books. You could go have another look at what you thought you knew, or you could just tell everybody that the new guy's stupid or crazy or mistaken. This kind of thing happens all the time, and a lot of so called scientific fields. Just about the only way to get around these gatekeepers is to wait for them to stop breathing. People began to look into the possibilities of giant squid sometime around the 1960s. Folks wanted to launch a search for giants, but things didn't really get going until 1986. The Beebe Project went out looking for giant squid. William Beebe was a deep sea pioneer willing to ask the questions that those people wanted hushed up. The search was started off the coast of Bermuda. The researchers were also looking into the six-gilled shark. Six-gilled shark live deep in the ocean. That extra gill helps them draw oxygen from the water. The three-person submersible Pisces 6 and the four-person Johnson Sea Link were used. The former researching a maximum depth of 1.5 miles under the water. Financing was primarily by NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association, and organized and led by the National Geographic photographer Emery Kristoff. The expedition involved scientists from numerous universities and scientific institutions, including shark specialist Eugene Clark and underwater explorer Joseph B. McInnes. Wildlife artist Glenn Loatis, known for his naturalistic depictions of giant squid, was also involved. If they couldn't get a photograph of it, they'd get a picture drawn. The expedition relocated to Newfoundland in November 1988, at which point it was joined by a giant squid expert, Frederick Aldrich, of the Memorial University of Newfoundland. Using the Canadian Navy's SLD-1 submersible and diving support vessel HMCS Cormorant, they set up shop 50 miles east-northeast of Bonavista Bay. Along with the submersible searching deep under the waves, the surface vessel pulled a gigantic squid jig covered with hooks and baited with tuna back and forth, hoping to draw a giant up from the depths for dinner. Looking for giant squid is not like fishing for anything else. If you know what will attract certain fish, you use that as bait. Not knowing how or why giant squid fed on a particular food, the scientists could only guess as to how to catch one. After years of planning, a series of further expeditions aimed at capturing footage of a live giant squid in its natural habitat were mounted in the late 1990s, but all were unsuccessful. 3 Smithsonian-backed efforts comprised of smaller-scale undertaking in the Azores in July 1996 and 2 major expeditions known as In Search of Giant Squid went to Kayakora Canyon off New Zealand in 1997 and 1999. These expeditions cost a lot of money. The researchers would need a ship as well as small support craft. A fuel was needed to power all those craft. Crews would need to be paid and fed. Organizations would have to be convinced that this was a viable search and that the outcome would show some kind of a potential return on the funding. These expeditions would cost over $10 million each, and they never answered any of the questions that they started out with. Each failure made the next expedition that much harder to entice funding. It also gave the folks involved new ideas to try. Since one idea didn't work, they knew to try something else. New technology is constantly coming out, making it easier to cover bigger areas. Having a film crew along also brought more public interest. Those of us who had spent hours in the library looking for strange things were willing to watch the searchers, even if they wound up coming home with nothing but dirty laundry and sore muscles. New ideas came along, such as remote control vehicles that could dive deeper than the subs with less danger to the scientists. Baited cameras were dropped into the ocean to float around for days or weeks and then retrieved and examined. As more expeditions were being televised, more public interest was generated. This increase in interest meant more big institutions were willing to fork out big bucks to look for giant squid, with the idea being whoever finds the first live specimen will be able to increase the revenue by saying that they know how to find things better than everybody else. February 2001, a team led by Steve O'Shea, including Malcolm Clark, Chung Cheng Liu, succeeded in capturing the first footage of a live giant squid when they caught and filmed several paralarval squid measuring 0.35 to 0.51 inches, tiny little newborns. The expedition involved the NIWA research vessel RV Kahoroa and RV Tengoro, Japanese names, I believe, Tangaroro, and the New Zealand fishing trawler Tasman Viking. 7 live squid were retrieved over a 12-day period. Attempts to simulate their natural conditions in the tank proved unsuccessful, and all of these creatures died. The expedition was the subject of the Discovery Channel documentary Chasing Giants, back when they were still interested in showing science and not entertainment. On the Trail of the Giant Squid, first aired 2002. I watched the show even though I already knew they weren't going to be successful. I'd already read about the expedition long before the TV show came out. Renewed interest in filming a live giant squid followed the 2001 recording of an enormous specimen of a bowfin squid at great depths off of Hawaii, which received global media attention. Big fin squid aren't the same as giant squid. The main difference are the lengths of the tentacles. Squid have shorter tentacles compared to their body size than giant squid. You can have giant big fin squid that aren't giant squid. I'll leave it to the boys in the white to come up with these comparisons. The first image of a live adult giant squid filmed at the surface was caught on January 15, 2002, near Goshiki Beach, Japan. The animal measured about 6.5 feet in mantle length, and its arms were 13 feet long. It was captured, but it died overnight. That's how you can tell it's a giant squid as opposed to just a giant squid. It's how long the tentacles are. In order for a squid to have been able to reach up onto that life raft and pluck the men off, it would have had to have been a giant squid because the length of the tentacles. Another unsuccessful attempt to film a live adult in the wild was Project Kraken off the Spanish coast in September 2002. This attempt was led by giant squid expert Angel Guerrera and involved the expedition ships Cientifico and Investigador, and the Spanish Navy patrol ship Marot. They used 3 autonomous underwater camera rigs connected to buoys at the surface with adjustable visible and infrared light and combination of acoustic and optical lures. A remotely operated underwater vehicle was used within an area of 20 acres using tons of frozen fish as bait. The project was canceled due to financial difficulties throughout Spain. Finally, on September 30th, 2004, a live giant squid was photographed in its natural deep-water habitat off of Ogasawara Island by Tsunami Kubadero and Koyochi Mori. The culmination of an effort that spanned 3 years of 26-week-long expeditions. The researchers employed a remote camera system suspended from floats at the surface on a long line of 3,300 feet. The system consisted of a downward-facing camera with a light and a data logger, below which extended a weighted fishing line containing chunks of bait at intervals along its length. The camera was configured to take one image every 30 seconds. The giant squid attacked and deployed bait. The giant squid attacked the deployed bait at a depth of 3,000 feet, and then it got snagged in the jig. Over the next 4 hours and 13 minutes, it periodically came into camera view as it struggled to free itself, gradually pulling the camera system up to 2,000 feet before tiring and slowly sinking back down to 3,300 feet. The giant squid was able to escape by severing its hooked tentacle. The tentacle was recovered and used to confirm the squid's taxonomy identified via DNA sequencing. It measured 18 feet long. The tentacle length was extrapolated to give the squid's total length at 26 feet. The squid was able to cut off its own tentacle and escape, and then regrow it. Squid and octopi regrow missing appendages. Scientists tell us that giant squid can grow up to 60 feet total length. This doesn't jive with what mariners have said over the years, though. They talk about these beasts being hundreds of feet long. There's also the colossal squid. One of the key differences between giant squid and colossal squid has to do with their size. A giant squid are technically longer than a colossal squid. A colossal squid weigh more and given the size of their mantle and body. So giant squid only beat colossal squid in length because of their arms and tentacles. Colossal squid also come equipped with huge hooks attached to their suckers instead of those tiny little teeth. These hooks can move in a circle so that it can grip from any direction. Talk about a weird animal. So if you've got a giant squid hanging onto your leg, ask yourself, do you feel one sharp pointy thing sticking in your leg, or do you feel a whole bunch of little tiny teeth? That'll let you know if you're being eaten by a giant squid or a colossal squid. The giant Pacific octopus found in the northern Pacific Ocean around the United States and Japan is the largest octopi species in the earth. The largest octopi ever found measured 30 feet long and weighed about 600 pounds. That's a lot of octopus. However, an average adult giant Pacific octopus measures around 16 feet and comes in at about 110 pounds. This is rather small compared to the squid. The octopi species is extremely intelligent, which is weird. Many have found that they mimic other species and they perform human actions, including being able to open a jar. They can hold a jar in one hand, one tentacle, and unscrew it with another. Because the giant Pacific octopus does not have a protective outer shell like other ocean creatures, it has to use camouflage to protect itself. Similar to other octopi, this species has blue blood due to copper rich protein that flows through its bloodstream. This particular octopus has special pigmented cells that lie just under its skin surface, known as chromatophores. These special pigment cells allow them to blend in with the surrounding coral in their environment. In terms of diet, this largest known species is not picky. You can find the giant Pacific octopus eating lobster, fish, scallops, snails, abalone, crabs, shrimp, and clams, and occasionally a diver. Or maybe not. This massive octopi will even eat other octopi and small sharks. They've even been seen eating birds when they get a chance. They'll sit under the water and wait for a bird to land on the surface and then reach up and grab it. They have anywhere from 2,140 to 2,240 suction cups on each arm. Or on all of their arms combined, which provides them with an extremely strong sense of smell and taste. They taste with their tentacles. And they have an exceedingly powerful grip. Octopus have been videotaped getting up out of the water, walking across the rocks in order to go get food. So that thing about the giant octopus being able to come up on land that I read about back in high school was true. Female giant octopi will lay more than 74,000 eggs, though they will die shortly after they bred. Before they die, mother giant octopi stay with their eggs for around 7 months to watch over them full time. They don't even go out looking for food. They just sit there and take care of their kids. Talk about dedicated and crazy. Each arm of an octopus is able to control itself semi-independently from the central brain. An octopus has 9 brains, 1 main brain and 1 in each arm. They have 500 million neurons in their body, 2/3 of which are distributed amongst their limbs. This means that there are 40 million neurons in each tentacle. An experiment showed that even when a disconnected arm was electrically stimulated, it would still move in the same pattern of a tentacle being controlled naturally by the octopus. The arm even adopted its movement patterns the same way a still connected tentacle did when the arm's environment and initial posture were changed. Octopi are so different from any other creature on Earth, some scientists have begun to say these 8-armed creatures are from some other planet. There was a book one time called Up from the Deep that I read. Fiction, but it was these kind of octopus creatures that landed on our planet and began eating people. I don't go in the ocean, and not even in a big ship, because ships sink all the time, and I have no want, wish, need, or desire to feed some underwater monster. About 40 years ago, I did go out on a sailboat. Everything was fine until the sun went down. Suddenly, all those giant sea monsters began to parade back and forth in my mind. I wanted to return to port as quickly as possible, but everybody else was having such a good time, and they weren't thinking about being eaten by monsters. Why those in charge don't want to acknowledge sea monsters exist until a body is found and nobody manages to hide it away is anyone's guess. Maybe it has to do with, if sea monsters are real, could flying saucers also be real? Once the cat is out of the bag, how do you ever try putting it back in? Once people know there is one unknown, unexplained thing out there, the possibilities of others can't be stopped. It's kind of like a snowball. As it starts to roll down the hill, it picks up size and speed, and The next thing you know, Area 51 is a tourist attraction instead of a secret government facility. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, tell people at the grocery store they should be listening. If you'd like to buy one of my books, you can find them at Amazon.com. The fictional works that I have written, I always do that. The non fictional works I have written are the Laredo Paranormal Research Society, uh, Fort McIntosh and the Paranormal, Paranormal Laredo, and Paranormal Stories. Currently, I'm working on the fifth book, which will be called More Paranormal Stories or something else, depending. If you have a story, something you've actually seen yourself, or something your grandfather, your grandmother, or uncle or aunt told you about, it doesn't have to be your story. It just has to be something that you have heard that you pretty much convinced is true. Send it to me and I will put it in my next book. You don't have to write it out as if somebody's going to read it. Just give me the basic facts, time, date, location, anything you can think of. Send it to me and I'll work it into a readable form. And then I will send you the draft so you can correct any mistakes. You can say, yes, that's what I saw or heard, or no, that's not it. And when my next book comes out, your story will be in it. If you're one of those people that doesn't want notoriety or you're afraid your neighbors are going to think you're crazy, we can give you another name. Do it all the time. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.